He had learned long ago that people told their stories without meaning to. Not with words, but with the small things. The way a hand shook while holding a glass. The way eyes scanned a room instead of meeting another pair. The pause before answering a simple question. Working as a waiter had trained him to notice these details even when he wasn't trying to. It was how he made a living. It was how he stayed safe. The restaurant sat on a quiet street. Nothing fancy, nothing loud. Just a place where tired people came to eat, talk, and forget their problems for an hour. He liked it that way. Routine made life predictable. Predictable felt safe. Every evening followed the same pattern. Clean tables. Write down orders. Carry plates. Smile when needed. Stay invisible when possible. That night started like any other. The dinner crowd came in slowly, filling booths and small tables. Soft music played in the background, barely noticeable. He moved through the room on instinct, not thinking much about anything at all. His mind was calm, almost empty. That peace didn't last long. The door opened, and two people walked in together. A man and a woman. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about them. They were dressed neatly, not too formal, not too casual. The hostess greeted them and led them to a corner table. He noticed them only because his section was getting crowded, and he was counting tables in his head. He walked over with menus in hand, ready to give his usual greeting. That's when the first strange feeling hit him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fear. Just a quiet discomfort, like stepping into a room where the air felt wrong. He couldn't explain it, but his body reacted before his mind could. The man didn't look up when he arrived at the table. His eyes stayed fixed on the menu, even though it was upside down. The woman smiled too quickly, her lips tight, her eyes alert. She thanked him, but her voice sounded careful, controlled. He told himself it meant nothing. People were tired. People were nervous. People were complicated. He handed them menus and asked for drinks. As he waited for their answer, the man finally looked up. That look stopped him. It wasn't rage or anger. It was emptiness. Flat, cold, and assessing. The kind of look that didn't linger but cut straight through. The man's eyes scanned him in less than a second, then dropped back to the menu like nothing had happened. He had seen that look before. Long ago, the memory didn't come fully formed. Just a flicker. A shadow at the edge of his thoughts. He pushed it away and focused on his job. The woman ordered water. The man asked for coffee, black. It was an odd choice for late evening, but he wrote it down without comment. As he walked away, felt his heartbeat pick up for no clear reason. He hated that. He had worked hard to keep the past quiet, buried under years of routine and simple living. He had promised himself he wouldn't let old fears control him anymore. Still, as he poured coffee behind the counter, his eyes kept drifting toward their table. They sat close, but not comfortably close. Their shoulders barely touched. The woman spoke quietly, leaning in. The man listened without reacting. When she stopped talking, he nodded once, slowly, like he was confirming something already decided. There was no warmth between them. No shared laughter. No ease. The coffee cup shook slightly when he placed it on the table. Not enough for them to notice, but enough for him to feel ashamed. He asked if they were ready to order. The woman answered for both of them. The man never corrected her. That disturbed him more than anything else. Usually, people spoke up about food, about preferences, about control. This man didn't. He watched. He waited. He let her speak, but his eyes followed every movement around the room. The exits, the kitchen door, the windows. It was subtle, but once seen, it couldn't be unseen. After taking their order, he returned to the service station, trying to shake the growing unease. He reminded himself that he wasn't a detective. He wasn't responsible for strangers. He was just a waiter. But the past didn't care about reminders. A memory pushed forward without permission. Years back in a different place, a different life, a crowded building, loud voices, panic moving faster than reason, and one man standing strangely calm in the chaos, watching, waiting, the same stillness. In his eyes, he gripped the counter until the image faded. when he brought their food. The man rearranged the silverware before touching the plate. Perfect alignment. Straight edges. He noticed the hands then. No jewelry. No visible scars. Clean, careful hands, but tense. Always ready. The woman barely ate. She kept glancing around like she expected something to happen. At one point, her foot tapped against the floor in a steady rhythm. Not impatience, anxiety. He checked on them more than necessary, using refills as an excuse. Each time, the man acknowledged him with the smallest nod. Nothing more. No complaints. No friendliness. Just quiet observation. The longer the couple stayed, the heavier the air felt around their table. Other guests laughed. Plates clinked. Life went on. Yet in that corner, time seemed slowed, stretched thin. Then something happened that made his stomach tighten as he set down the check. The man finally spoke directly to him. His voice was calm, low, almost polite. "You've worked here a long time, haven't you?" It wasn't a question born of curiosity. It was a test, he answered carefully, keeping his tone even. "A few years?" The man studied his face as if measuring the truth of that answer. The woman looked down at the table, her fingers clenched around her napkin. The man gave a small smile that never reached his eyes. "You seem very observant." The words landed heavier than they should have. He forced a light laugh, pretending not to understand. "Comes with the job." For a brief moment, the man's eyes sharpened. Then the expression vanished, replaced by that empty calm again. He nodded and stood up, leaving cash on the table. As they walked toward the door, the woman glanced back. Their eyes met for half a second. In that look was something close to fear, or maybe relief. He wasn't sure. The door closed behind them. Sound returned to normal. Air filled his lungs again. He stood frozen. Staring at the door long after they were gone, the past was no longer buried. It had just walked in, sat down, and dared him to remember. He tried to tell himself it was over. After the couple left, the restaurant slowly returned to normal. Plates were cleared. New guests arrived. Someone complained about cold soup. Someone else asked for a different table. Small problems. Ordinary problems. The kind that belonged to the present, but his mind stayed stuck at the door where they had. Disappeared. He finished his shift on autopilot, smiled when required, nodded when spoken to. Inside, something old had been scratched open, and it refused to close again. Every sound felt sharper. Every shadow felt heavier. When his shift finally ended, he clocked out and stepped into the cool night air, hoping it would wash the tension away. It didn't. The street outside was quiet. A few cars passed. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. He pulled his jacket tighter and started walking toward the bus stop. Halfway there, he slowed down. The feeling returned. That same sense of being watched. He stopped and glanced at the reflection in a store window. No one stood behind him. Still, his shoulders stayed tense. Years ago, ignoring that feeling had almost cost him everything. On the bus ride home, his thoughts slipped backward without warning. He remembered a different city, a place louder, harsher. He'd been younger then, working odd jobs, moving wherever rent was cheap. Back then, he had seen something he was never meant to see. A man arguing with another man behind a building, voices sharp with anger. Then silence that came too fast. He had hidden, heart racing, watching through a gap he wished he could unsee. One man walked away, calm, unrushed. The other never moved again. When police arrived later, chaos followed. Questions were asked. Statements were taken. But he stayed quiet. He was young, afraid, alone. And the man who walked away that day had turned just once, meeting his eyes with that same empty calm, the same look he saw across the restaurant table. The bus jerked to a stop, snapping him back to the present. His hands were damp, his jaw tight. He hadn't realized how deeply he had clenched it at home. He locked the door behind him and leaned against it for a moment, listening. Nothing. Just silence. He barely slept. Every time his eyes closed, pieces of the past floated up. That alley. Those eyes. That's stillness. Morning came too soon. He showed up to work tired but alert. The way people are when they know something is wrong but don't yet know what to do about it. Throughout the day, he expected them to return. They didn't. Instead, smaller details began to bother him. He replayed the night over and over in his mind. The way the man had studied the room, the choice of coffee, the careful silence. Nothing on its own proved anything. Together, they formed a picture he didn't like. By evening, he made a decision he had avoided for years. After his shift, he walked past his apartment and kept going. The old building sat near a busy road, almost hidden between newer offices. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old paper. He hadn't been there in a long time. He approached the desk, unsure of what to say. "I need to look something up," he finally said. The clerk barely glanced at him before pointing toward a row of computers. He sat down, fingers hovering over the keyboard. His heart beat harder with every second. He searched local news, old reports, unsolved cases. At first, nothing matched. Then he adjusted the date range. There it was. An incident years ago. A man found dead behind a commercial building. No witnesses came forward. The case went cold. The article included a blurry image from a security camera on a nearby street. The man captured in it was only visible for a second, but it was enough. The same posture, the same walk, the same calm. His mouth went dry. He didn't save the page. He didn't print anything. He shut the computer down and stood up too quickly, nearly dizzy. Old fear wrapped around his chest, familiar and heavy. On the way out, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You notice more than you should." His heart dropped. He stopped walking, scanning the street. Cars passed. Pedestrians moved around him, unaware. His phone buzzed again. Some things are better left alone. He deleted the messages immediately, as if that would make them disappear. That night, sleep refused to come. Every sound outside made him tense. Every shadow in the room felt closer than before. He realized then that the choice had already been made for him. Whoever that man was, he remembered him too. The past wasn't just returning. It was watching, and it was waiting. The next few days felt stretched and unreal, like time had slowed down just to watch him struggle. He went to work, moved through his shifts, smiled when needed, but nothing felt the same anymore. Every bell from the kitchen sounded too loud. Every door opening made his head turn. He checked his phone again and again, half expecting another message. Nothing came. That silence felt more threatening than words. At work, he stayed alert, too alert. He began noticing things he had once ignored. A man who sat alone for hours, without ordering much. A car parked across the street longer than necessary. None of it meant anything on its own, but together, they fed the fear growing inside him. He avoided walking home at night, took earlier buses, changed routes. Small precautions, learned from a past he never wanted to revisit. One evening, during a slow hour, he stepped outside the restaurant for some air. The sky was dark, heavy with clouds. As he leaned against the wall, he saw the same woman from that night. She stood across the street. She wasn't with the man at first. He wondered if he was imagining her, but then she looked straight at him. No smile this time. Just tired eyes and a face pulled tight with stress. She crossed the street slowly, stopping a few steps away. He didn't move. Something told him not to. "I hoped it was you working tonight," she said quietly. Her voice shook just slightly. "I don't have long," she continued before he could speak. "I shouldn't even be here, but you need to listen." He glanced around. Cars passed. People walked by. "No sign of the man. You recognized him," she said. It wasn't a question. He stayed silent. "That look you gave him," she went on. "You've seen him before?" His chest tightened. "You shouldn't be talking to me," he replied carefully. She let out a short breath. "I know. Trust me. I know. But if I don't say this now, I might never get another chance." She told him they had been moving for years. changing cities, changing jobs, always leaving quickly. The man said it was for safety. Said people from his past were dangerous. I used to believe him, she whispered, until I started noticing things. The same careful habits, the watching, the calm reactions to events that shook everyone else. She spoke faster now, words tumbling out. I searched his name once, she said. Found nothing. No records. No history. Like he didn't exist before a certain year. That year matched the one burned into his memory. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. When you looked at him, I knew. I saw the fear in you, real fear, not imagination. A car honked nearby. She flinched. He knows you noticed, she added. That's why he asked those questions. His stomach turned. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because I'm leaving, she said. Tonight. I packed what I could. I made an excuse. He thinks I'm going to visit family. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. But if he realizes I'm gone for good, he'll look for someone to blame. Someone who saw him. She met his eyes. That's you. Before he could respond, she stepped back. Be careful, she whispered, and walked away without looking back. He stood frozen long after she disappeared into the crowd. That night, he didn't go home. He stayed with a friend who asked no questions. He barely slept, replaying her words over and over. By morning, one thought was clear. Staying silent was no longer an option. After work the next day, he walked into the local station. The building felt colder than it should have. He told himself he wasn't there to accuse anyone, just to share information. Just in case, the officer listened carefully, asked calm questions, took notes. No promises were made. We'd need more than instincts, the officer said gently. He nodded. He had expected that. As he left, doubt crept in. Had he done the right thing? Or had he just placed a target on himself? That answer came faster than expected. 2 nights later, as he locked up the restaurant after closing, he felt it again. That familiar presence. He turned slowly. The man stood near the end of the street, partially hidden by shadows. They stared at each other. No anger. No shouting. Just recognition. The man took a step forward, then stopped. His voice carried softly through the quiet air. You should have let it go. His heart thundered, but he kept his voice steady. I tried. For the first time, the man smiled openly. It was calm, certain. People who notice too much rarely understand what they uncover. He said, footsteps echoed somewhere nearby. The man glanced away, then back. This isn't over, he said. Before turning and walking off into the night, he leaned against the door. Breathing hard, now he knew this was no coincidence. It was a warning, and next time. It might not be spoken after that night. Nothing felt distant anymore. The danger was no longer a memory or a feeling. It was real. It had a voice. It knew where he worked. He took a few days off, claiming he wasn't well. In truth, he was thinking, planning. Fear still sat heavy in his chest. But something else had joined it. Anger, not loud anger. Quiet, steady anger that came from being hunted for simply seeing the truth. He stopped living on routine every morning, checked his surroundings before stepping outside. He paid attention to reflections in windows, 2 footsteps behind him, 2 cars slowing down for no clear reason. It was exhausting, but he couldn't afford carelessness anymore. The messages didn't return. That worried him more than threats. Silence meant waiting. He met with the officer again, this time with more clarity. He spoke slowly, carefully, sharing what he remembered from years ago, not guesses, not theories. Just what he saw, where he was standing, how the man moved. What made him unforgettable? The officer listened more closely this time. There was a witness back then, the officer said. Someone who reported odd behavior near the scene but disappeared before giving a full statement. That was him. He felt a cold wave pass through him. I was young, he admitted. I didn't think anyone would protect me, the officer nodded. I understand. But if we move forward now, we'll need your cooperation. That word stayed with him. cooperation. It meant risk. It also meant an end. Back at work, he returned carefully. He stayed closer to the kitchen, avoided being alone near closing time. His coworkers noticed the change but didn't ask. Everyone had their own struggles. One afternoon, a familiar car parked across the street. His heart skipped. It stayed there for hours. No one got out. When his shift ended, the car was gone. The next day it returned. Same place, same angle. Watching, he reported it immediately. The officer advised him not to confront anyone. "Let us handle this," he said. Days passed. Then weeks, nothing happened. The lack of action started to break him down. Fear turned into nerves. Sleep faded into short, shallow rest. He wondered if he was losing his grip, if he had imagined the danger growing larger than it really was. Then one night, the restaurant phone rang after. Closing? He almost didn't answer, but he did. The voice on the other end was calm and familiar. "You don't listen very well," the man said. His throat went dry. "You talked when you shouldn't have," the voice continued. "Now, people are asking questions." He said nothing. "I don't want trouble," the man added. "I want quiet. I always get what I want." The line went dead. He set the phone down slowly. His hand shook, but his mind felt strange and clear. The threat had always been there. Now, it was spoken. That night, the officer visited his apartment, listened, took notes. "We're close," the officer said, "but we need patience." Patience felt impossible. 2 days later, the woman reached out again. Not in person. Through a short message sent from a borrowed phone. "He's looking for you," it read. "I'm safe for now. Please be careful." The message disappeared moments after. That was the moment he realized. This wasn't just about him anymore. He agreed to help. The plan wasn't dramatic. No traps, no heroics, just observation, timing, and truth. He returned to his usual routine, pretending nothing had changed. Serving tables, smiling, staying calm, and waiting. The man came back, late one evening, walking alone. Same calm steps, same empty eyes. He chose the same corner table. They locked eyes. This time, neither looked away. He served him quietly. No shaking hands. No mistakes. The man studied him closely. "You look less afraid," said. "Maybe I am," he replied. The man smiled faintly. "Fear keeps people alive." "So does truth," he answered. Something shifted in the man's expression. Just slightly. Moments later, officers stepped inside. Not rushing, not loud.com. The man looked around, understanding immediately. He didn't resist, didn't argue. As they escorted him out, the man turned once more. "You should never have remembered," he said. He met his gaze, steady now. Someone had too, as the door closed behind them. The weight he had been carrying finally began to lift. Not everything was over, but the waiting was. The restaurant felt strangely quiet after the door closed behind them. Not silent, but lighter, as if something heavy had finally been removed. The normal sounds returned slowly. A plate clinked. Someone laughed. The kitchen timer rang. Life moved on, unaware of how close it had come to something darker. He leaned against the counter for a moment, letting his breath steady. His legs felt weak, but his mind was clear in a way it hadn't been for years. The long wait was over. Later that night, after statements were taken and questions were asked, he stepped outside alone. The street looked the same as it always had. Cars passed. Streetlights hummed softly. Nothing dramatic marked the moment. That felt right. The days that followed were slow and careful. He met with officers more than once, filling in missing pieces he had carried silently for too long. Each conversation felt strange at first, like handing over something personal he had kept hidden. But with every word spoken, the weight eased. The case didn't explode into headlines. There were no flashing cameras or crowds. The truth unfolded quietly through records, movement, history, and small details that finally lined up. The kind of truth built patiently, the way real stories usually are. He returned to work a week later. Walking back into the restaurant felt unfamiliar, like returning to a place after being away for years, even though only days had passed. His coworkers greeted him with tired smiles and casual jokes. No one asked questions. They didn't need to. Serving tables felt different now. Not heavier. Clearer. He noticed people the same way he always had, but without fear tied to every detail. A nervous laugh was just nerves again. A quiet glance was just shyness. He didn't have to search for danger everywhere. One evening, as he wiped down tables near closing time, a message came through on his phone. "I'm safe," it read. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed a simple reply, wishing her peace. Nothing more needed to be said. As weeks passed, the story slowly reached its end. A court date. A final confirmation. Sudden twists. Just resolution. He expected to feel proud. Instead, he felt tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that comes after holding tension for too long. He took time off again, this time not to hide, but to rest. He walked more, sat in quiet places, let his thoughts wander without racing. One afternoon, sitting alone in a small park, he realized something important. The past had not ruined him. It had shaped him. The sharp senses he once saw as a curse were the very thing that saved him, that saved others. What once kept him awake at night had finally found its place. He didn't see himself as brave. He had been afraid the entire time. Courage, he learned, wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting despite it. Speaking when staying silent would have been easier. Life slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. The restaurant stayed busy. Seasons changed. New faces came and went. Occasionally, someone would remark that he seemed thoughtful, observant. He would smile and say nothing. Some nights after closing, he stood near the door and watched people leave. Couples arguing softly, friends laughing too loud, strangers passing without ever noticing one another. Ordinary lives unfolding. He understood now how fragile that ordinary life could be, and how important it was to protect it. He never told his full story, not to friends, not to coworkers. Some things didn't need an audience. The knowing was enough. Years from now, no one would remember the waiter who noticed too much. They would remember a case resolved, mystery finally closed, and that was fine with him, because he knew the truth. Sometimes, the most dangerous secrets aren't revealed by force or power, but by quiet people who pay attention. By someone standing in the background, doing an ordinary job, who chooses not to look away when something feels wrong. That night, long ago, had changed his life, but it did not define its end. As he locked up the restaurant and turned off the lights, he felt something close to peace. Not perfect, not permanent, but real. For the first time in many years, the past stayed where it belonged. Behind him, time did not stop after everything came out. That surprised him most. He had expected some clear line between before and after, a moment where life announced that it was safe again. Instead, days continued quietly, one after another, ordinary and steady. At first, that ordinary feeling made him nervous. He kept waiting for something to go wrong. A call late at night, shadow that stayed too long, a message that should not exist. Old habits are hard to unlearn, especially when they once kept you alive. But nothing happened. Weeks passed, then months. The case was finalized without drama. No sudden twists. No unexpected turns. The past settled into records and reports, where it belonged. He was asked once more to confirm small details, then it was done. He walked out of the building feeling lighter than he had expected. Still, peace didn't arrive all at once. Some mornings he woke up tense for no clear reason. Other times he felt an urge to look over his shoulder, even in places he knew were safe. He didn't blame himself for it anymore. He understood that healing didn't move in straight lines. He kept working at the restaurant. People assumed nothing had changed, and in many ways they were right. He still carried plates, still memorized orders, still moved through busy hours with calm focus. But inside, something had shifted. He was no longer running from his instincts. He trusted them. one slow afternoon. A younger coworker asked him how he stayed so calm during rush hours. "Pay attention," he said after thinking for a moment. "But don't let your thoughts run away from you." The coworker laughed and said that didn't really explain anything. He smiled. It wasn't meant to. Outside of work, he began doing things he had avoided for years. Sitting in crowded places without searching every face, taking longer walks without planning escape routes, letting moments last. Instead of always preparing for the worst, some nights were still difficult. Dreams came without warning, familiar places, familiar silence. Heart racing, then reminded himself where he was. Those nights grew less frequent over time, fading like echoes. One evening, while closing the restaurant, he noticed the same booth where everything had started. It looked smaller now, ordinary, just another table. He wiped it down slowly, then moved on. That simple act mattered more than it should have. People came and went through his life the same way customers came through the restaurant. Some stayed briefly, some returned. A few left impressions that lingered. He learned that being observant didn't mean carrying everyone else's weight. Some things could be noticed and then released. Months later, he ran into the woman by chance in a crowded place. Not planned, not expected. They recognized each other instantly. She looked different, lighter, more at ease. They exchanged a few quiet words, nothing heavy. No retelling of the past, just mutual understanding. When they parted, there was relief, not sadness. Both of them had moved forward at home. He reorganized his small living space, got rid of things he no longer needed, old papers, old habits, physical reminders of a life built entirely around caution. He kept one thing, a small notebook where he wrote observations. Not about people anymore, but about life. Things he noticed when he slowed down. How light changed through the window. How silence could feel comforting instead of threatening. Observation, he realized, was not the enemy fear was. One day, walking past the restaurant on his day off, he chose not to go inside. Instead, he sat on a bench across the street, watching strangers enter and leave. He saw pieces of himself in some of them. The tired ones. The alert ones. The ones pretending everything was normal. He felt no urge to intervene. Just understanding later that year, an offer came his way. A different job, a quieter place, fewer hours, no rush crowds. He thought long and hard before accepting. Leaving the restaurant wasn't running away. It was a choice. On his last day, he worked a full shift. Said goodbye in simple ways. No speeches, no explanations. When he clocked out, he stood still for a moment, listening to the familiar sounds one last time. Then he stepped outside. Life continued. He still noticed things. Always would. But now, those sharp senses felt like a gift instead of a burden. They helped him live carefully, not fearfully. Sometimes doing the right thing does not bring applause or recognition. Sometimes it just gives you back your quiet life, and for him, that was enough. Life had settled into a quieter rhythm, but it was not empty. It had weight in the right places. He woke at the same time most mornings, not because fear pushed him out of sleep, but because his body was ready for the day. That was new. For a long time, mornings had felt like battles he had to win before noon. Now they felt like doors. The new job suited him. Fewer people, longer conversations, slower movement. He liked learning routines without rushing through them. He liked that mistakes could be fixed without panic. He learned names slowly and forgot them just as slowly. No one asked him about the past. He didn't offer it some evenings after work. He walked instead of taking the bus. He let himself wander without a destination. He noticed small things again, but without carrying them home. A cracked sidewalk filled with weeds. A cat sleeping on a warm car hood. A couple arguing softly, then laughing at themselves. Observation had changed for him. It no longer pulled him backward. Once, in a small cafe, he stopped at regularly. A man sat 2 tables away and caught his attention. Not for any serious reason. Just a familiar tension in the shoulders. A habit of sitting where the door stayed in view. The old version of him would have followed that thread. would have built stories out of nothing. This time, simply noted it and took a sip of his drink. Some stories were not his to carry. Weeks blurred into seasons. He marked time by changes in the air, by when jackets became necessary, by how early the sky turned dark. The city revealed itself in layers he had missed before. He found comfort in repetition. Walking the same streets, buying groceries at the same store, saying hello to people who recognized him without knowing anything about him. That anonymity felt earned. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. Official. Plain envelope. He stood in his kitchen holding it for a long moment before opening it. Inside were a few formal lines confirming what he already knew. The matter had been fully resolved. No further action required. He set the letter down and made tea. That was all. No rush of emotion. No grand relief. Just the final click of a door closing softly behind him. He thought about the person he had been when all this started. The one who worked long shifts and kept his head down. The one who thought staying invisible was the safest way to exist. That version of himself had done what he could with what he knew. He didn't judge him anymore, growth, he learned. It often looks like forgiveness. On a quiet weekend, he visited a place from his earlier years. Not the exact spot, but close enough. A familiar street with new paint and new signs. The building behind which everything had changed was gone, replaced by something bright and ordinary. He stood there for a few minutes, hands in his pockets, letting the memory play out without resistance. Then he walked away at night. When the city settled down, his thoughts sometimes drifted toward questions he had never answered. Why he noticed what others missed? Why he remembered faces when names slipped away? Why instincts lived so close to the surface for him? He stopped trying to explain it. Some people were built to see clearly in dim light. That didn't make them broken. It made them necessary. He began writing again, more seriously this time. Not stories of danger or fear, but fragments of daily life. Small moments captured before they disappeared. He wrote about quiet mornings and crowded buses. About the comfort of knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. He never wrote about the man. That chapter stayed closed. One evening, while returning home, he noticed a small commotion near the corner of his street. Nothing alarming, just confusion. A lost child crying while adults tried to help. He stepped in without thinking, spoke calmly, asked simple questions, kept his voice steady. The child stopped crying. Within minutes, a parent arrived, full of relief and apologies. The moment passed, forgotten by everyone else. He stood there for a second longer than necessary. This was what his sharp senses were not danger care. Another month passed. He received a message from someone he hadn't heard from in a long time. A gentle check-in. A question about how life was treating him. Quietly, he typed back. He smiled when he sent it. Quiet was no longer a warning sign. It was a reward. He understood now that stories don't truly end when the danger leaves. They end when the person inside them learns how to live again without carrying fear as protection. That kind of ending takes time, patience, kindness toward oneself. Some nights, when he locked his door and turned off the lights, he thought about how many lives cross paths every day without ever truly seeing one another. How much remained hidden in plain sight. He didn't feel burdened by that knowledge, just respectful of it. He lay down and slept deeply, the kind of sleep that doesn't scan the dark, the kind that trusts morning to arrive. And when it did, he woke with no urge to look behind him, only forward. Life did not bring another dramatic turning point. Instead, it tested him in smaller, quieter ways. The kind that didn't make headlines but shaped a person just as deeply. One morning, while leaving his building, he noticed a new neighbor struggling with bags at the bottom of the stairs. Nothing unusual. Just a moment that could easily be ignored. He stepped in, helped without thinking, exchanged a few polite words, then went on his way. Later that day, he realized something important. He hadn't scanned the hallway. First, that realization stayed with him longer than the interaction itself. The sharp awareness was still there. Always would be, but it no longer controlled his movements. It worked quietly now in the background, like a trusted partner rather than a distant alarm. At his new job, responsibility grew slowly. Someone noticed his attention to detail. Someone else trusted his judgment. He wasn't put in charge of people, but people began asking for his opinion. Small decisions. Practical matters. He answered honestly, without overturned. Trust, he learned, returned, when you stopped waiting for it to break. Some afternoons. He sat alone during breaks, watching people pass by through large windows. He saw micro-stories in motion. A woman reading the same line over and over, a man rehearsing words before a phone call, a child pulling gently at an adult's hand, impatient and curious all at once. These moments no longer triggered worry. They created connection. One evening, while returning home, a sudden sound nearby made several people jump. A loud bang from a construction site. The crowd reacted with confusion and laughter once it was clear nothing was wrong. He noticed his own response. His body stayed calm. That surprised him more than anything. Later that night, he sat at his table and opened the notebook he had been keeping. He read older entries and barely recognized the voice behind them, not because it was weak, but because it was guarded. Every thought wrapped in caution, he turned to a blank page and wrote freely, letting words exist without control. He wrote about comfort, about how safety could feel ordinary, not fragile. Writing no longer felt like protection. It felt like expression. He stopped measuring time by events from the past. Instead, he marked it by quieter achievements. Sleeping through the night, enjoying conversation without planning an exit, choosing silence because it felt right, not because fear demanded it. Relationships shifted too. Not suddenly, not loudly. He listened more openly, spoke more honestly. Let moments be slightly awkward without rushing to escape them. People noticed, not in dramatic ways. Just enough to say, "You seem lighter lately." He smiled when he heard that. One weekend he traveled alone to a nearby town. A simple getaway. No agenda, no expectations. He explored slowly, ate alone without distraction. Watched the sun lower over unfamiliar streets. Being alone? No longer felt like hiding. It felt like choice. On the last evening of that trip, he sat near a window in a quiet place and watched reflections overlap with reality. His own face blended with lights outside, past and present coexisting instead of fighting. He understood then. That closure doesn't always come with a final scene or clear lesson. Sometimes it arrives gently, through repeated proof that you are safe now. Back home, life continued its steady rhythm. He no longer thought of himself as someone shaped by one event. He was shaped by many things. Some painful, some ordinary, all valid. The sharp senses remained, but they had grown wiser, slower to judge, quicker to release. One night, while lying in bed, he realized he hadn't thought about the old fear in weeks. That realization didn't scare him. It comforted him. He fell asleep easily. Morning arrived without tension. Light filled the room. The city hummed awake. He stepped outside without hesitation. For the first time. The future felt open not because danger was gone, but because he trusted himself to face whatever came. That trust was earned, and it stayed with him.